Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to the ECSA registration process workshop presented by CESA YPF. My name is Ian Fourie. I'm one of the YPF representatives. Just a little bit of health and safety. On your far left, there's a cable on the floor, so just watch out for that one. So just welcome to the day, welcome to this event. We hope that it's a fruitful one, and I hope that you have many questions in store for us. So just with regards to the program, we're going to have our 4 guest speakers go up first. So we're going to try and aim for a time around about 7 p.m. Be a bit late, missed the soccer there. So we're going to try and aim to get the speakers through by around about 7 p.m. and then we're going to move on to a Q&A open forum where you guys can ask your questions and then hopefully we'll have answers for you. So the 4 speakers, first up we have Viola Milner from JG Africa. So she's going to be speaking about the background to the registration process and how to register. Then we're going to have Francois Varnig. He is from Oricon. He's going to be talking about his personal experience with the PR Tech registration process. Then we have Matteo Angelucci, also from Oricon. He will be talking about his personal experience with the PR Eng registration process. And then we have our guest from ECSA, from the Cape Town Satellite Office. It is Zeblon Myongo. He will be talking about the foreign application process for people outside of South Africa. So without further ado, let me welcome up Viola. Here we go.
Can you hear me without this?
No, can't get it.
But it might affect the thingy-majiggy, the recording.
No, it won't affect, it won't, it's through the microphone now.
Okay, so can I use it without this then?
No.
No! Can come sit here closer. Okay, like this, like this. Okay, let me try. Okay. Is that clear? Yeah. Yes. Hello? Yes. Okay, so I wasn't meant to initially do this presentation, but I've stepped in, which is fine. So some of you might have seen some of the slides before from my previous presentation last year, but I've hacked it a lot shorter. A lot of the slides are mostly for your own reference anyway, so you can just print them out and use them while you're writing. So hopefully it's useful. To start thinking about the kind of people in the room, I figured there'd be some candidates who aren't yet ready to register, so early graduates, less than 3 years experience, can I just get an idea of if, yeah. Okay, so there are a few of those. So I'm hoping from this presentation you'll get an overview of the process, but also, and in that way, ways to better plan your experience that you can get it more efficiently, because a lot of us look back, and if we had actually just intervened after 6 months of doing the same thing or something like that, we waste some time by getting stuck in a rut going in one direction. And so by understanding the process and all the things that you need to be achieving, and reviewing yourself every 3 to 6 months, then you can actually make sure you get your experience a lot faster. So I'm hoping that you'll just get an overview of the process, also tips on the kinds of records you need to be keeping to make the whole application process quicker when you get there. For candidates who are ready to register, I assume a lot of us are here today. Yes. That's basically, you're just here for a summary of the overview of the process, so you don't have to read all the documents again and then the kick in the butt to get it all done. And then the mentors, if there are any here, are there any mentors here who are registered? Excellent. And so I'm hoping that you'll just get an idea, because I think the registration process has changed slightly since you went through the process. So by understanding the newer process and the requirements, you'll be able to better support your mentees and also review their documentation more effectively. I think it's useful to just understand why you want to register. Everyone here today has the intention to register, but you go through ups and downs and you lose motivation, and so it's nice to just think about why you want, the purpose of registration, and what it gives you, the industry, and your company. So I won't go into this too much, but basically it's required by the Engineering Professions Act. It provides the industry with a standard of a professional standard. It maintains a standard in the industry and the ethics, public safety. Obviously, we work a lot with that kind of thing, and so to have professional registration is quite important. For you, it gives you peer recognition, self-esteem, salary increases, and marketability. I think it's important. I think we get to a point where initially it's okay to kind of extend it 1 year, 2 years. So you're on, say, 7 years experience, 8 years. You could have probably got it 4 or 5 years experience. So you lagged a little bit, that's okay. But I think you get to a point where people stop leapfrogging you. So it looks fine if you haven't got your registration up until a point. But once people start leapfrogging you, it reflects badly on you if you are applying for a new job, or it might be frustrating because people might get promoted over you. So while you still have the experience, there are these silly little, it's what you, it becomes, I guess you could dismiss it as paperwork, but I think it only gets harder to do it because life gets more busy, responsibilities increase. So it's definitely worth keeping on track and trying to get it within the 5 to 7 year, I would say, period is really worth it. Then for your company, it's obviously very beneficial for applying for bids. They often have a commitment and an undertaking with ECSA, so they need to have registered mentors working with them, under them, to be training new candidates and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of benefits, and I think it's important just to keep on track because you definitely lose motivation. Then, so as a candidate, whether we're all registered as candidates or not, I mean, there'll be a variety. It's your responsibility to set the goals towards your registration, to find mentors and managers to help support you in this process, to drive it yourself, and to do your own paperwork. It's a bit of a slog, but once it's done, and it's off your back. I'm submitting next week, so I'm quite excited about that. So we'll see how it all goes, but it is that I feel very relieved. So for those of us starting on the process, but also if you do want to, if you haven't kept a lot of records or aren't really up to date with your training reports or things like that, there are tools where you can use to track the activities that ECSA is requiring you to gain experience across with your project experience, and to use things like your performance appraisals that are part of your annual or 6 months. Hopefully they're a bit more frequent than annual, but that's a good way to reevaluate your experience and say, look, I've actually had no experience with contracts. For my ECSA registration, I need experience with contracts up to level E, so please try. And that's how you can get your managers to support you. So it's better if you reevaluate that at least every 4 to 6 months so that you can push it, but in worst case, annually, have a look at how your experience is going across all facets of, so these, this breakdown is from the discipline-specific guidelines, but also just general project asset kind of, the project life cycle type aspects. So you have to be touching on all of them across your experience. So it's a way to, the finance one is quite a big one, is to look out for, because that exposure doesn't come easily. So you might need to, that might be a gap in a lot of experience. So this is a way for, if you do have a year or 3 years experience, 5 years experience, at least reflecting over your career experience and picking up gaps and how you can strategize with a manager or mentor to try and get that, because that's definitely something. That, and then obviously construction, health and safety risks aspects there you might not have had sufficient exposure to, but the rest you should have covered quite easily, depending on if you have specialized quite early or not. So that's something you just need to be aware of as well. So those kind of things you can, evaluate, keep records in your diaries, timesheets, and most importantly, identify your missing experience. So as I said, just review your own progress every 4 to 6 months, and then touch base with a mentor or manager to help support you, because you don't have the ability to give yourself projects that give you that exposure. So you need to ask for it, and by showing willingness and that kind of thing, and that you're on track, you're way more likely to get there. The actual application process itself is not too scary. It's just paperwork. So it's an application form that general your education. It's about 2 pages of your education information and your address. Then there's the training reports, about 10 pages. Summary of your training report, 1 page. Engineering report, about 10 pages. A list of your courses that you've done, and your referee report. So it's between 25 for engineers and 50 pages for technologists. It's not a big deal. In terms of the ECSA documents, so this is where one of the things where you start, okay, I'm going to get everything in order, I'm going to start my application, and you start reading these documents and you lose momentum before you actually start writing. So it is good that you have read these. They are well written and researched and great documents, but so if you read them maybe as a graduate when you have a bit more time, then read them so they're in the back of your mind. But I mean, coming to things like this, speaking to people who've gone through the process recently, it's more important just start writing, I think, before you lose momentum with stuff like this. And just to be aware that the discipline-specific guidelines are not in the new system yet, so they don't make reference to outcomes at this point. But it's still a useful document. If you are going to read one, read that one that's most relevant to your discipline. So to start, whether you haven't been keeping up to track but you're not quite ready to register, or you are, I work backwards a little bit. So I take my CV and project experience or any records that you've had. I work from the summary training, the TER summary, so to lay out my plan, training reports, and then went back and wrote them, rather than trying to write from the beginning, because then you end up, rather give an overview structure, work back, and then write them. Commit to getting them done, set yourself some deadlines. So by starting, you divide your career into logical periods of work, group your project's experience into your position or types of responsibilities, type of work, water pipeline design, and then you move to structures or whatever your experience might have been. If you change companies, that'll definitely be a line in the sand, and you'll start a new training report for that. And studies, perhaps, if you've done full-time studies versus part-time studies, you treat them differently. But so you just plan how to figure that, you can't overlap time periods. So a useful way of doing this is to not be too strict with your project timeline end dates. So often what happens if you'll be working on one project and it carries on going during construction and queries come back, so you're still working on it for another 6 months, but actually now you're in a different phase really, and bulk of your work is on a different type of project, and just ignore those 6 months. Just pretend it stopped then and carry on. Like, don't make your life difficult. No one's going to it's the easier you can make it for the reader and the reviewer, the better. So don't get caught up on silly little things. Like, yeah, just as you can see, I've went through the process and I just got cut full with all stuff like that. So, and so you can have multiple periods for one project. So you could start in the design and go into the construction. So you can have a training report that covers the design part, a training report that covers the construction monitoring, and other projects in between. But then there's also a period that can have 5 different projects in it as one period or training report. About 5 periods. I have 6. It really depends on your career and what you've been doing, but the more you have, the fewer words you can use, so it becomes very difficult to describe your experience. So just keep that in mind. Leave out projects that don't actually add value. Be a little bit ruthless. That's an example of an organogram. Just a few things. You must show the people who are signing your reports off, show up and down. So often in the beginning they actually, or even now, not many people below you, but I put drafting support just to show some kind of progression and responsibility. Yeah, it's fine. Oh, the other thing just is here is if you're printing in black and white, rather shade the back of the box instead of bolding it or something, because that just makes it not so clear. With the mature candidates, training, there's 2 forms that look almost exactly the same. So if you open the application form and you get a bit confused, so one is a TER and the one is a TEO. The TER is for people with less than 10 years experience. TEO is for if you have more than 10 years experience. So what it allows you to do is just condense your experience because the amount of projects you've worked on is vastly different to someone who's only got about 5 years. So then you only have to complete 3 TERs, which would need to be signed off, because also chances are 10 years ago, 12 years ago, those people aren't still around. So to get them to sign off your reports is harder as well. So that's just, yeah, if you get confused, you see 2 similar forms. That's how the one form, that's a training report. I'm sure Matteo will go through bits of that. But basically the training report, and this is where I've included slides, bigger slides that I'm not going to explain, but these are the things that I had printed in a little bookie when I would write my reports of the key information that I needed with me at the time. So it's combining the outcomes, the levels of responsibility, the varied work experience. So that was what I was showing you earlier, the kinds of tick boxes that they're looking for, and then the complexity of problems that you're working on. And to check that you're just highlighting the right things. If you're starting out and you don't have enough experience to write your whole report now, definitely start thinking of writing training reports from every 6 to 12 months. You don't have to necessarily get them signed off, but if you are changing jobs or something, then definitely get those signed off before you leave. If you do decide to condense it later, which is fine, which is what I've done. I had a few more. I've condensed them, and I'll just go back and get them signed because I can. But it just makes it a lot easier to review back, and then you're on track. Then you don't have to write 6 whole reports. You only have to write the last 6 months, and then your big report. So these are the outcomes, and they're grouped into 5 main categories. I'm not going to go into them now, but you get more engaged with them as you carry on, and I've got a slide here which just helps group them, which I found quite useful. These are the levels of responsibility, so I just printed these out to have them with me. That looks terrible, but on my slides it's okay. So you should, when we send this around, and you probably would have seen it if you've seen the other presentation, but it describes the ECSA's definition. It's just extracted it from the documents. ECSA's definition of complex engineering problems, broadly defined problems, and well-defined problems. So that's just something to keep with you. And this breaks that down further in terms of descriptions of those complex engineering, broadly defined with some questions. So that just helps you highlight the right types of information and to identify whether you're actually working on the right level of complexity, which is something that you will need to discuss with your mentors. This is something else I kept with me while I was writing, because it takes one of the older versions of the training reports from the PR Tech application forms, because that's one thing that does change and can be confusing, is the latest document on the ECSA website does change. So you'll be working on one and then someone else will start and download a different version and things look different. So this was from an older version that they've changed it now and they just have the blank. But I quite like this because it grouped aspects of experience. So you wouldn't have to use all of these aspects in one training report. So that's quite important. You don't have to cover documents and reports, management of materials, interactions with clients and stuff, health and safety, all in one report. Just the key elements that are covered in your experience at that time. And this just links the outcomes to them. So when you are talking about that kind of thing, it just refers you to the right kind of outcomes. I found that quite useful. This is just how I did mine, just a few, after reviewing them with a bunch of friends, we would, a few tips, we added that column there, that's more like the PR Tech submission, but they found, while we reviewed them, found it easier to read. I bolded some of the project names so that they could refer to the organograms more easily. Just a few little, sometimes I had a heading like that, but you want to minimize words, so shorten the headings and things like that. Just tips on the actual writing and the type of language to use. It must be very factual. You don't need to address all the outcomes in each period. Altogether, it needs to be 2,000 words. It needs to be in first person. Use construction language and to minimize the amount of words that you're using, but to get the point across more effectively. So use SANS 1200. I did the water pipeline testing according to SANS 1200L, and it just shows the background, your background. Or we wrote the contract. I helped compile the specifications and the contract document under GCC 2015, and use the correct terminology. The other thing that adds a lot of value without a lot of words is the contract value. And the scale. I designed a 2 megaliter reservoir, a 4 megaliter wastewater treatment works. Add scale by only adding one word, or things like that, or 8.7 million rand job, those kind of things, 13 million rand. Show limits to your responsibility, so show that you were aware where your responsibilities extended or didn't, and where you had to refer to more senior people. Show progression of responsibility. And just start writing. It's a lot easier to edit your work than to get it right from scratch. So just write rubbish first and then edit it. Best way to do it. The engineering report, it's quite scary. But yeah, it must be done. So for technologists and technicians, it's a bit more prescriptive. You have a question, and which I must say are quite tricky. So the way they word it is actually quite difficult to answer. I struggled. So maybe this is actually easier. So I'm not going to go into that, but just some tips on the more free range report type for PRN is basically there's specific notations, is that the right word? Notations that you need to use. Just make sure you use those little things on the corner there. And stick to word limits. Identify 1 to 3, maybe 4 projects but of the correct complexity and level of responsibility, and they'll need to cover all the outcomes. Here you highlight the aspects of a complex problem, engineering problem, and so using those sheets with the definitions and the questions is quite useful with your project. Brainstorm it, see what are the important things that they're looking for, and make sure you've included those in your descriptions. Structure it so that it's easy to read. We write quite complicated reports usually, so it needs to read quite nice. And whether you decide to structure it as outcome 1 and then write about it, outcome whatever, write about it, or project 1 and write about it and then just include the outcomes along the way, you can do both. I actually did a mix. For mine, I grouped it in terms of Group A outcomes, so it was the first 3, which are the design-related outcomes. And then for the others, I wrote outcome 4, outcome 5, outcome 6, and I just pulled from different projects. It worked with my experience. It doesn't work with everyone. So, yeah, see what works. Use a lot of the tips from the training reports. Don't repeat information. So you can shorten your training reports by saying, this project is largely covered in the engineering report. I did this and this and this, so it's a lot shorter, and then you explain it more in the engineering report. Use diagrams and images that came from a mentor or a reviewer who used to review them. He said he really liked to see diagrams. He liked to get an idea of where the project was, what it looked like, that kind of thing. That's just a terrible, I don't know, that's how it's better. But basically, yeah, so there you can see a little bit, but that's just me grouping them and describing the project a little bit. Then there's a self-evaluation, why you deserve to be a PRN or not, and your list of activities and courses of what you've done all the way up to now. So this is quite important to keep a list. I had a list, I lost my list, so that wasn't very useful at all, but it's conferences you attended. So I actually saved it in an email folder, which might be useful, like a PST file. So whenever I filled in job training application forms or things like that, or course adverts came in that I was going to, I pulled it into that folder if I didn't update a Excel list. So that's just how I managed to replace my list that then disappeared. And yeah, includes presentations, serving on committees, anything that shows you have interest and outside of your work. It's quite important. Your referees, yeah, select your referees. They need to have a knowledge of your working, experience and your abilities. So you can't really ask someone 3 or 4 levels up, the MD, to write your referee report. It needs to be someone who works more closely with you. But they do need to be registered. So that's where it can be quite difficult. So if your direct supervisor isn't a PRN or PRTech, it can be more difficult. So you'll need to look around your office and try and work around those kind of things. But yeah, 1 or 2 levels up is okay, as long as you've got a working knowledge, or perhaps if you've moved companies recently, I don't know. But you do need to keep that in mind. But only one of them has to be registered, not both. Yeah, you can choose. That's the form that they have to fill in, so they have to be quite specific, and they have to rate you on it, your ability, or if they don't know, they have to say they're not capable to respond to this. So it won't look very nice if your referee reported most of those things is like, I can't comment. Just quickly, what happens when you submit? Now you've got all your paperwork, you've got everything. I would recommend getting your referees, if you can, to give you them in sealed envelopes, included in the whole pack. And now we have a Cape Town office, a satellite office, which is very exciting, because now you can submit your application directly to them. They do a completeness check of your application so that everything's been filled in correctly, you're not missing big chunks out of your form, that kind of thing. They send it directly to Joburg, which means that they can track your application. So you're not phoning someone in Joburg to find out where it's going. You can phone Zeblon in Cape Town, and he will be able to track via Joburg why it's taken 6 weeks and you haven't heard anything, or where in the process your application is. So that's very exciting. Then Joburg does a lot of they rip your application up and they send it to reviewers, 3 different reviewers. Different parts get sent to different people, which is why you can't have them back to front, and you'll get phoned if you print it back to back, and then they'll ask you to resubmit and a whole bunch of stuff like that. But basically it gets sent to different people. The 3 independent assessors look at your reports and make a recommendation. Then there's a moderator that takes all 3 assessors' comments and reviews them all together. If the one guy says definitely give him his PR engine, and the other guy says not a chance, he has no experience, then there's a problem, and then he'll review more, but they should all be in line. And some of them might be asking for specific information. So from the moderator, he or she makes an overall recommendation, and it goes back to ECSA head office. They then will implement that. So that will either be, and this is a little bit different to the past, there's an experience appraisal or assessment interview, which is where they're looking for more information. There might be a gap in your experience that you might not have written about, so they give you a chance to describe it again, basically, and ask questions with a specific aspect in mind. You will have to do a presentation, so that will be one aspect where they'll contact you and set up an interview. With the Cape Town office now, again, which is exciting, or through an online platform, which was quite stressful. So the online interviews, I've heard some stressful stories about that. The portal didn't work as well as it should have, and it's been quite stressful, but now we have Cape Town office interviews, which is great. And then or you might go straight to a professional review, where the recommendation is, do the professional review, I think this person is ready to register, but ask about this, and this type thing. Then you'll do your professional review and you'll hear back, I've heard 2 to 4 weeks later. So from the most recent submission, the timelines are looking like PR about 6 months, PR Tech about 4 to 6 months, depending. So the backlogs have been eradicated. The peer support networks, basically you don't have to do this on your own. There are networks. There's a new CESA platform that's been revamped a little bit, which is quite cool. There are workshops, and there's the new Cape Town office where you can direct a lot of information, and it really helps. So we'll do questions later. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Viola. Appreciate your time. Just in case you missed any of that, this is being recorded and the presentations will be uploaded to the website. We'll show that to you later. But without further ado, next we have Francois. He's going to be talking about his personal experience in the PR Tech side. So welcome aboard.
Just one minute. Is it on? No need. Okay. Yeah, I'm Francois Warner, registered civil technologist now with Oregon since 2010. Working for our offshore center that we mainly do work for Australia in Brisbane and doing roads, geometric design. So I'll basically just give a quick run through on my journey on professional registration specifically as a technologist, and then just a few tips and tricks to make registration a bit easier. Just to give a brief summary of my journey, and you'll see in the next slide why I give a timeline, is studied my theoretical semesters 2008 to 2009. I know some of you guys at CPT, you do your theoretic 1 year in service, and then back to university. We luckily in Free State we can do it, handle all that, and then do our experiential training. So I started in Oregon in Bloemfontein based on site as a student technician in service. After that, civil technician remaining at Oregon. Brief gap there, so I was on site, so it was a bit difficult going to Bloemfontein to study. So after that, 2012 to 2013, did my BTech part-time based in the office. Then further on, civil technologist after studying BTech. Then relocated to Cape Town until now. So taking that into consideration, now let's see if it refreshes. No, it doesn't. So theoretical, your semesters, not really applicable, but that will be covered. You put that into your academic record in all the forms that you have. Your student technician or your in-service training, so you cannot see Mr. Barack Obama saying, yes, we can, but you can add this in your reports, in your training and experience reports, you can add this, because it's experience that you've done, and it's work experience, so you can add it in your TDRs. So civil technician, I've done that, so TR number 2, while studying part-time, TR 3 and 4, then after BTech, TR 5 to 6, and relocating TR 7. So this just gives an indication, as well as said, that any change in your work environment or your responsibilities, anything relating to that, you're basically going to change your periods. Your period is going to be split according to that. And then for civil technologist, after your BTech, you need at least 3 years minimum before you submit. So I think that's one of the first things that they're going to check. If after BTech, 3 years experience, then they'll consider your submission. So journey to registration, my updates for progress. So I submitted 2 years ago, 2016 in December. So they just said, okay, we received it. A few days after that, the considered complete. So that the completeness that Viola talked about is that they just go through, see if everything is in place, see if everything is complete, and then they tell you then, okay, the process is beginning. Then they'll update you on some of the milestones. So application is forwarded to the relevant committees for your experience evaluation or your experience appraisal. Then after that, it was about 5 months when they told me, okay, interview invitation. So previously, I think about probably 3 years ago, technologists only had interviews when they found something that need clarification in your report, or there was maybe something sketchy. But now it's a given that most of the recent technologists that's registered, all of them have gone for interviews. So I think that's probably a standard thing that came through now. So you'll see that took about 5 months from submission until the interview invitation. Interview, mine was a video call. I wasn't privileged enough to have an office in Cape Town. So, yeah, there's a few people that done a video call. Some of it was okay. Some of the people said it was bad. Mine was about 50-50, so you're left wondering afterwards. And then about 2 weeks after that, got an email application successful. So total duration was about 8 to 9 months. But times vary, and I know between March and June, I actually emailed them after June and asked just why is there such a big delay. And they said there was some change in their processes. So I guess it's the luck of the draw. That's luck. So okay, the interview. It was basically a 50-50 mix of technical questions and experience-related questions. Some of the people that I've spoken to only had technical questions, and then they had a second interview with experience-related questions, which was a bit weird. Other guys also just had to answer experience-related questions. They probably ask you to elaborate on some of the methodology that you've done, so how you went on designing some of the geometric or drainage elements, or elaborate on some of the outcomes that you've handled in your engineering report. And important thing is know where your limitations lie. Don't try to wangle something if you don't know the answer, because they also need to see that you've got interrelations with other disciplines and you know where your limitations are. You're not just going to do something out of your discipline without seeking someone's help or without seeing a specialist or someone that knows what's happening in an area that you don't know. So some of the questions was like, explain how you go about fitting geometric alignments, or what is your understanding of ethics, which is an interesting question. But prepare, I think, go through all of the outcomes. Some of the outcomes, like Viola said, is the outcomes of the questions that they ask in the engineering report. They ask it a bit difficult, and I think some of them wanted more direct answers in the report. So just see that you cover the outcomes directly. Other ones was like, what legal acts have you used in your work? So if you've only dealt with like one legal act, and you're going to sit there like me, umming and ahhing about the one legal act that I've used. So if you see there's in the outcomes they talk about what legal acts or health and safety stuff, just make it part of your goals to maybe do self-study, or just ask your manager that you want to get more involvement in some of the legal aspects, and just to cover yourself in that manner. Where have you applied sound judgment in your work? And that's mainly covered in a lot of the questions that they ask or that you have to answer in your engineering report. And my favorite one that they asked was, what work of a BTEC level do you do which a technician will not be able to do? So prepare that one. That one was quite interesting if they just throw that on you. Few tips is the one thing that made life a lot easier to summarize the periods and split the periods where you're going to base your TERs on is use your company's billing software, if you use billing software, or your timesheets to determine your timelines and the project that you worked on. Or as Viola also mentioned, your CV, if your company's got an updated CV. So we've got an internal web page that we can go onto, employee self-service, timesheet history. You can basically get a summary of all the projects that you work on and the total time that you've booked on the project, or even a detailed summary of every day what project you booked on. And you can export that into Excel, make a quick timeline, not quick, but probably 30 minutes. And then you've got a nice timeline, you see where you can split your periods. Align your yearly goals with your ECSA outcomes. So if you sit with your manager and look at your goals for the next year, try to align some of it with the outcomes, like I mentioned, the legal aspects, maybe try and work in something, or if you know you've got to do some kind of a design software, you can just work it in some of the experience that you need for your engineering, for your outcomes. Have multiple colleagues review your reports. So if you've only got your managers and guys to work with you reviewing your reports, they know what you did, they know what you're talking about. Get someone in another team just to get an independent view of what you did, just to know that it makes sense from an independent person's point of view. And then just brush up on the basics before you interview again. Just like go through some of the manuals that you've used. So if they throw a curveball, you know what to answer. The two most important tips is, first one, start early. Keep your training and experience reports updated. I know a guy from my previous office that actually took leave for a week or a week and a half to do his reports because he never started to do it. And then he didn't even end up 2 years later submitting. So don't waste your leave. If you keep your TRs updated, you don't have to take leave to do it. The second one, don't trust technology. My personal experience, save your documents on multiple locations. External, server at work, cloud-based. I saved my work on my external, and the next day it wasn't saved. And there was no temp file on the PC either, so I had to do half of my my engineering report again. Yeah, questions to follow that on.
Thank you, Francois. Next is Matteo. He'll be sharing his personal experience on the PR-Eng process. Here we go.
Thank you. Can I just hold it like this?
Question mark.
Yeah. Ryan, I'm technologically challenged. You should remember that. To the Britney Spears thing. All right. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, cool. My name is Matteo Angelucci. I've been with Oricon now for the last 5 years. Before that, I did a BSc and an MSc at UCT in civil engineering and concrete structures. So I'm going to be sharing with you my little journey, at times rewarding, many times frustrating, about registration. I'll tell you why in a minute. So Viola basically covered all of this, but I went through the YPF portal before presentation, and I just saw a lot of questions of why register. Viola covered most of it in very good detail, but what I want to add to it is see it as an investment in yourself. I mean, getting this registration, getting this recognition actually puts you on a platform where you can actually be marketable to a whole new variety of companies and a whole new opportunities that you open for yourself, so that you're not always confined and doing the same thing because that's what you have achieved, that's the ceiling that you've hit. No matter how much you try, you need to get over that hurdle of registration. I know people that have been at that hurdle for a lot of time, and sometimes they get frustrated, but like Viola said, life takes hold, responsibilities take over, and it does get a little bit challenging finding the time to do it. So just remember that end goal all the time and just drive yourself to be able to do it. So where to begin? Yes, get up to speed with your documentation. I know that when I started, I think about 2 years after I started work, I said to myself, okay, I need to start making a dent in this. And I went online and downloaded all the documentation. I was quite chuffed. And then on a Saturday afternoon, it was pouring with rain outside. And I said, this is a good day to start. And I went to these documentations, and half an hour later, I was like, what is going on here? I'm being very candid and honest, guys. It's who I am. So basically, after much deliberation and much pushing through, personally, I found the documents that helped me the most are the RO2 and the RO4, which kind of outlined from what I found to be the things that I referred to the most while I was writing up my documentation, namely the process of application, the responsibility levels, and the 11 outcomes. So I kept referring to those documents again and again and again while I was writing. So it might be worthwhile, if you haven't read through these documents yet, maybe to start on those and then go through the others as you go along. Develop a plan. Very important. I mean, we are engineers. We know everything about sitting down, doing a desk study, making a list of how to proceed about our process. So familiarize yourselves with these outcomes and responsibility levels until you can say them at night. If someone wakes you up at 3 o'clock in the morning, you can recite them. You definitely are going to feel that it's going to be very useful. Familiarizing yourself with these. During your experience, also log your progress to keep track of your projects and level of operations. So it's a very difficult thing to start doing that immediately. I mean, I found that when I started working, I was very driven and very motivated, but then I found myself 2-3 months after starting to work, I really don't know how to start writing this, so I kind of left it. And 2 years later, I said to myself, I need to start making a plan. So maybe set yourself, if you haven't started yet, I mean, I don't know how many of you are very, very early on in the process. Can I just get a show of hands? How many graduates where you... Okay, so there are a few of you, so I'm not talking nonsense. maybe just start thinking about a date when you want to tell yourself, okay, by this date, I think I'll have enough to start writing. Because that's where I kind of found myself 2 years into my work experience. I was gearing up to increase my responsibility in the design office, and I'd put my name down to be resident engineer on a couple of sites that we had going on. So I said to myself, you know, site work is definitely a line in the sand in my development. So how much can I actually write up to site work? And that's when I started, and I actually found I had about, you know, three responsibility levels in me, like 3 TERs before site. And I managed to get all of those done before I went to site. So it just helps to continuously track yourself and just remember that you might not be able to do everything at the beginning, but have a period in mind where you say to yourself, yes, this is when I want to start being able to start writing. And again, very, very useful mentor or line manager assistance. So find someone in the office who you can refer to and you can bug anytime, every time, and who doesn't mind. Even if they do mind, just keep bugging them, bribe them. I find that engineers like to be bribed in the office. Did I get in trouble for that joke, Ian? I hope not. All right, Veolia did go through these, so I'm not going to dwell on them too much, but these are the ones that I kept on referring to back and forth. Important, familiarize yourself with them. Responsibility levels as well. So why I'm going through these is that I kind of tried to combine all of my timelines into something like this. So on that left-hand column are the names of all the projects that I worked on. I started, because I did my master's in concrete mixed design, I started off in the water and wastewater treatment work structural design section, and I kind of stuck there because I enjoyed the work and I managed to grow into responsibility levels quite quickly there. So I've mainly dealt with civil infrastructure projects on the structural design side. So I have a whole lot of treatment works, reservoirs, and process buildings that I helped design, and I grouped them in accordance with the responsibility levels, being the different colors and dates. And all of those are grouped into different TERs. And obviously, this changes. This is a moving target. This only looks like this now because I was able to submit after a while. But I find that this actually does help in keeping track of progress. Something that you can use in addition to your 4-monthly training plan and work guide. Mentor line manager assistance. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Keep tracking goals. You know, it is a moving target, but it is important that you just keep on top of it. Don't lose sight of the bigger picture, which is that ECSA certification. And again, you have to be the driver. You need to be responsible for your own future. What I mainly want to concentrate on from my journey after this general outline is your submission and interview. Number one, external review of application pack. Yes, I've been asked by a couple of people to look at their application packs now, but I nagged a lot of people to look at mine, and everyone came back with something different. So after a while, you will have looked at it so much that you will not be able to pick up everything, and everything will seem like it's perfect to you, or it's as close to perfect as it can be. A fresh pair of eyes, you have no idea what good it can do. When you send your parcel, depending on the company you work for, some companies may be able to send it off for you and follow that admin process and just be able to do everything from there. I just chose to keep it kind of independent and just do everything myself because I found that at least I was able to communicate with people directly when I was tracking the parcel, and registered mail, courier, invest. Don't just send it off in some way and just hope that it gets there. I phoned the ECSA offices in Joburg a lot of times because I didn't get an email confirming that they had received it. So after I was able to get through to them, they told me that they had received it, and then I would hear from them. So at least I knew that it was with them and they had received everything. Another thing that Veolia did mention is your referee reports. Make sure that you do send them with your application pack. I've heard horror stories of people that send their application pack without it because they give their referee reports to their referees, they fill them in and put in a sealed envelope and send them off. And months later, they haven't received any news because somebody hasn't put their referee reports and their application pack together, and now there's these two documents flying around separately, and no one knows where they are and how to join them. People make mistakes. It happens. So just do everything you can to make your application as simple as possible to handle. So like Viola said, give your referees your application to fill out and 2 sealed envelopes. So what I did is I gave them a sealed envelope each, and then they gave it back to me. I put the name of the referee at the back. I folded them, and I put them in my application pack envelope, and at least everything's there. Because you can't see that referee review. They fill it out in knowing that you will never see it, because what they fill out there is confidential. It's between them and the reviewers. Be patient, but nag. Yeah, I put that in capitals because I think they know me up in Joburg, the ex-office. And I think Zeblon might know me as well, because I CC'd him in a couple, and he was the only one that was replying like half an hour later. And he was saying, guys, please, because Joburg's getting a very bad rep down here, because you're not following up. To give you an idea of my timeline, I submitted in July 2017, and just before the December break, I got an email saying that my experience appraisal stage was over, and that I was going to be contacted for a professional review interview. So that was key, because I spoke to a couple of people, and I asked them, does that mean that everything is fine? I said, yes, because if it wasn't, they would tell you that it's an experience appraisal interview. So that means that they had seen my application and they said, right, this person contains enough information, the application pack contains enough information, the candidate is probably ready to be registered, but we just want to ask him a couple of questions, get to meet him, see what he's like, and how he handles a pressure situation. So that happened in December. I waited about 3 months, again after nagging quite a bit. I think that had to do with the fact that my application kind of hit the Christmas break right in the middle. So if you can try submit early on in the year, then you have a much better chance of getting some continuous feedback. But if you have that Christmas break right in the middle, then there's people that go on leave and they come back, and then some of them take longer to come back than others. So yeah, that's just a couple of tips from my side. Then 2 weeks before my professional review interview, I got notice of it. So I think it was early March, they sent me an email and they gave me a video call interview option to Joburg. Now, I asked around and I said, how does video call interview work? You know, did you find it good? I asked some colleagues upstairs who had gone through the process. I got mixed reviews, I got 50-50. Some of them said it's fine, it's really not bad at all. Some of them said, you know, the connection, I went offline a couple of times. It actually lasted like an hour and a half because they had to dial me in again and again and again. So I just made the call and decided to fly up to Joburg for my interview. Because I had been given, you know, your company might be able to reimburse you for that, for the travel cost. And again, some companies might not. But again, I saw it as a self-investment. And I just decided, book the flight, book a car to drive to the offices. Just rather do it in person, if I can give you a piece of advice. And I think now that we have a Cape Town office, it'll be much easier. So, yeah. After my interview, they told me it'll take about 2 weeks to find out, but it took 2.5 months. I put 2 months there because I rounded it down. It was nice. I'm not too sure why. I have a feeling that it's because what they didn't tell me is that I think the adjudication or the review committee meets a certain number of times in a year. And I think my interview had happened just after their initial meeting for the year. So I think they had met in February and my interview was in March. So I think they met again in May. I only found this out because I kept on phoning them after, emailing, asking people upstairs. And a colleague of mine told me, no, I went for my interview in February and they told me that I was going to find out around about May. So sometimes the panel of interviewers might not know, or they might forget to tell you. So just ask them. That's what I did, and they forgot to tell me anyways, but at least I asked them, how long will it take? You know, if I'm successful, just, you know, be assertive and ask the right questions, even if you get the wrong answers. So basically what happened, 8 months waiting period. I know some people that took about 3 or 4 since submission. I know some people that took about 1.5 years since submission. It changes. I don't like saying it, but it's like, it's a lottery, unfortunately. It was a lottery in my case. And I think now that we have a satellite office in Cape Town, things will be much smoother. So for those of you who are preparing your application, I think you'll be in good hands. Now, the interview. This is how I felt. That picture is exactly how I felt in the interview. And I put it up there because I want to urge you not to feel like that, because that makes you your own worst enemy. A couple of tips. So prepare a presentation in advance. So when you get that email that your experience appraisal stage is over and they'll give you a professional review interview, or when you get that email that someone will contact you for an interview, start preparing your presentation then. Because in my case, they gave me 2 weeks notice, and so I was ready, I could tweak it. And in other people's case, they gave them an email on Thursday saying your interview's on Monday in Joburg. Please fly up or prepare for a video call. And now you've got deadlines for projects, and you probably were planning to work on the weekend, or you were planning to go away for that weekend, and now you've got to stay because you've got to do your presentation. That's stress, guys. If you're anything like me, it does add stress. So prepare your presentation in advance rather don't get caught. Like I said to you earlier, face-to-face I found being better than Skype. What might help is arranging a mock interview before time. So contact some of your colleagues in your company or other companies who've done this process before and who are willing to give half an hour of their time, maybe during a lunch break, and arrange for a mock interview. It helped me loads because I was able to see what kind of questions they ask afterwards and how the panelists behave and whether they look for certain information that might be missing. In my case, for example, a lot of stuff about general conditions of contract terminology, which I had been exposed to, but I just did not put in my presentation because I simply overlooked it. And environmental act and environmental management of construction works. Again, stuff that I've been exposed to and I had reported in my reports, but I just didn't elaborate on it enough in the presentation. And being pointed out in the mock interview is much better than finding yourself like a deer caught in headlights in front of your panel of reviewers. If you go for a face-to-face presentation, make extra hard copies because we're not perfect. ESCOM load shedding happens and power does cut out, and then you have no presentation and your panel of interviewers is expecting you to just speak without any visual aids. And if you can wing it like that, then fine, by all means. But just some helpful tips there. Make some extra hard copies and hand them out to them just in case. What I found also helped me was stick to a routine on the day. So I did not look at anything the night before. Like those of you, I know a couple of you for a long time. You guys will know that the night before the exam, I did not touch my books. Just stick to your routine, whatever helps. Don't stress about it. What's done is done. And just remember, before the interview, during the interview, you're feeling under pressure, just remember that you are there because a panel of reviewers has been told that you have done enough on your application to meet with them so that they can gauge on a personal level whether or not you are ready for registration. Chances are that most of the information is on your application pack, so they just want to scrutinize a couple of things. Chances are that you are there because your referees have filled out a fairly good assessment of you, and the people that have reviewed your documents, your TERs, your engineering reports, so your documents has gone through major scrutiny. I think I definitely kind of underestimated how much scrutiny this documentation goes through before you actually submit it. So make sure that that does happen, and that's on you. Like the onus is on you to make sure that people review it. What I found helped me is like make a group of friends, group of colleagues, different companies, same companies, just kind of keep track of each other's progress. Motivate each other if one of you is slacking, or if you're slacking, take some slack from others, take some criticism, constructive criticism from others. It does help a lot. And relax. I mean, all of this, I'm telling you why, is relax, because in my personal experience, I did not relax. And I found that my interview started fairly well towards the first 20, 30 minutes. They told me it's just going to be 15 minutes. So prepare a 15-minute presentation. An hour and 15 minutes later, I was still there. So that's why I probably stopped relaxing. I said, why am I still here? What, haven't they got enough from me? But when they asked me questions that I wasn't sure how to answer, I kind of panicked a little bit. And towards the end of my interview, they said, and I'm not paraphrasing, they said, this panel is not convinced that what we're seeing today is worthy of registration. And they asked me, like, do you still think you're ready? And I believe that was my saving grace, because I felt like telling them, no, you're absolutely right. I'm like, I'm walking out now. Please just let me know in a couple of months, 3 to 6 to 12 months, if I can come back for an interview. I told them, yes, I do think I'm ready, because what you've identified as gaps in my experience are not things that I get exposed to on a daily basis, are not my area of expertise, are not my area of specialization. But I am conscious of that, and I do know that to fill this and to carry on about my practice, I need to interact with the people who do have those answers, or I need to source the information from the right sources, and in the end, be able to consult as much external sourcing as possible, literature, industry research, other people, other consultants, contractors even, to make sure that I make my final decision ethically. And I do believe that you're not here to assess a one-man show. I do believe that you're here to assess someone who can act ethically, and because of that conscious awareness that I can act ethically, I do believe that I'm ready to be registered. And I think that was my kind of like saving grace, which allowed me to get that positive email 3 months later. So my point that I'm trying to make tonight is be aware of what you don't know. If you don't know a question, rather than it's like, I've heard people that say, they ask them about payment certificates. We don't really deal with payment certificates ourselves. It's like the other guys do it. Wrong answer. Because that shows them the kind of attitude that you're taking, and that shows them that, okay, this person is really not taking this stuff seriously. Whereas you say, like, I haven't been exposed to payment certificates, but I know that the colleagues in this department handle it, and I know that it's got to do with this and this and this and that. And that at least tells them you've been exposed to it, you are aware of it, and the importance of it. That's all I have. That's all I have, guys. Sorry. This is a photo from my site work. Thank you, guys. If you have any questions, then I'm sure we'll stick around.
Thank you, Matteo. Last but not least, we have Zeblon from the CT ECSA registration office, the satellite office, and he'll be talking about the foreign application process for anyone outside of South Africa.
Thanks. Guys, how do I do this?
You can just talk close.
Good, we'll just check this. One, check. Hi guys. The name is Zeblon, but you can call me Paul. I'm the branch coordinator for Cape Town, and I'm not an engineer. I'm an HR guy. I just applied for a position. So I was expecting a bashing from the two guys because, ever since I've got into ECSA, it hasn't been looking good, but they went quite easy on us, and I'm thankful. So guys, I'm going to be talking about, foreign applications and how they fit into ECSA. If I can have perhaps, by show of hands, who perhaps hold a foreign qualification? Who intends to apply using a foreign qualification? Okay, so this is an FYI. Cool, man. So guys, ECSA is part of a international engineering alliance. Now those guys, in short, come up with policies and procedures in terms of how they regulate the engineering profession globally. And ECSA represents South Africa, and they sit in the panel and they come up with agreements. I'm not sure if you guys know about the Washington Accords, Dublin Accords, and the Sydney Accords. Okay, so you know about it. Helen, thank you very much for having me. The guys know everything. Cool, man. So pretty much what the guys covered is a function from our registrations department. Now, next to that is a education unit that does an evaluation of qualifications, because we live in a global society, and we have international alliances, meaning that there will be people coming from SA who will obviously function in the engineering space, and there will be you guys who go perhaps abroad and function in the engineering space. There needs to be processes that kind of facilitate that process to make sure that standards are aligned. Not sure if I'm making sense. And the education unit ensures that we actually look at those guys coming in and we kind of evaluate the qualification and pit it against the standard, the required standard. I'm not going to say ECSA standards, I'm going to say the required standards. That's just definition of why, or reason why the department exists. And the policy E17P is a document that you can read online. I'm not going to dive in too much into that at this stage. I mentioned the accords. So for anyone who wasn't aware of the accords, the Washington Accord governs or explains what the requirements are for professional engineers and candidate engineers. The Sydney Accords defines and explains what are the requirements for professional technologists and candidate technologists, and the Dublin Accords are there for the professional technicians. So how I kind of remembered this was, the professional engineers come from the traditional universities, and the technologists and technicians are the University of Technology guys. So I happen to come from CPUT, so yeah, that's how I remembered it. And so it's pretty simple, guys. The guys covered a lot in terms of the registration process. So I'm not going to go too much into it. But what happens is that when we receive a foreign qualification, we kind of look at the accords and see if there is a provision for it. Is it listed on there? Is it does it appear? And then if it does, you proceed to registration. You kind of try and meet all the 11 outcomes, and you go through our ECSA processes, and we try and take 4 months, not 9, 8, and we get you guys registered. But if perhaps the qualification is not listed on the accords, there is an alternative route. They've got things called QEs. I kind of forgot what a QE is at this stage. Guys, make note. I'll send you an email or something about it. But what then happens is that they kind of look at the qualification. There's like a team of guys. They come through, they look at the qualification, and what they try and assess, they pit it against. They first pit it against a BSc. They first try and see if perhaps maybe this person would register like engineer level. And if perhaps they find some sort of, they call it substantial equivalence, then they'll give you feedback to say, okay, look, we find that it might be equivalent to our BSc, so please register at, engineer level. Then it goes through for registration. But if there's no subsequent or rather substantial equivalence, we then drop it down and we look at, can we pit it against a BTech? If we don't find anything there, can we pit it down against a national diploma? And if it doesn't pit against all those three, unfortunately, we'd say, hey man, look, we've got a list of institutions that you can perhaps apply to. So, but if it meets equivalence to any one of those, we then advise on the process for each of the three categories. So yeah, it's just a long process. It takes a bit longer. It takes about 3 months for that process. That's before you go through registration. What we're trying to do at ECSA is to kind of shorten registration to about 4 months. That's why we've got satellite offices. I'm responsible for Cape Town. We've got a Durban office. We've got a Bloem office. Yeah, we do have a Bloem office. And we have an East London office. So everything is now decentralized. We've got assessors in the various cities. And, we try and do things, a bit speedily. But because of this process, it simply adds on a further 3 months, depending on our speed. Now, guys, if any one of you was going to be registering, using a following qualifications, I'd give you a life hack would be to familiarize yourself with the ECSA policies. And the second one, obviously, would be to call me to try and make sure that, you know, we get things done. Matthew, remember? Yeah, anyways, guys.
The light at the end of the tunnel.
So yeah, guys, that's it on foreign qualifications. And should you have like definite queries on ECSA and how I can assist, that's my number. Helen has got my email address. And yeah, my office is located at the Atterbury House building on Rubik Street. I'm not sure if you know where that is. I'm on the 11th floor there. I work alone. And my coffee is still full, so I've got a very big jar of coffee. If anyone wants to visit, I'd welcome that. And I think the questions will take a bit later.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay, thanks very much to our guest speakers this evening. So now we're going to go into the open forum where you can ask your questions. We have run slightly over time, so we've got about 45 minutes. If there are any questions that you were unable to ask, or if it's something you may have forgotten or comes up at a later stage, we do have a forum, an online forum. So if you go to the website engineering.org.za, if you type that domain in and click enter, and you just scroll down slightly, you'll see that there's this ECSA registration guidelines link. So if you click on that, it'll take you to what CESA YPF are presenting. It's an online Q&A, so you'll be able to go into various tabs over here, and you can ask your questions through that. So if you've got a PR Eng related topic, PR Tech related topic, it's all categorized for you. This is probably where you found your sign up at the bottom. So this is the tab that we will use for continuing the conversation afterwards. So if there's anything that spills over, we can follow it on this. So with the panelists up front, Helen, do you have the other mic, or is that not functional? Okay, so we're going to leave the mic with the panelists up front. So if you do ask a question, just try and raise your voice. We had some technical difficulties earlier. So yeah, they can answer your questions, and if there's someone in the audience that are also able to answer, let's open the discussion that way. So there we go. Should we start off with any PR Eng or PR Tech related questions?
Yeah, just maybe a general question. What role is CESA playing now? Are they out the picture completely? And what was their grievance? I don't know if anyone can shed some light.
So I think that one is above my pay grade.
I'm gonna try and answer that question, but I think the earlier will definitely have to chip in. As far as I know, CESA is still getting appointed for the review process, the interviews, as far as I know.
Yeah.
But I mean, none of the people that interviewed me were from ECSA. Were working for ECSA. They were all volunteers from voluntary organizations.
Right.
So CESA is still. I don't know what you have to do to become that process, but it's definitely something I want to do. Because I think that I would like to change the way people see interview. Experiences about it on a face-to-face level, and it's not what it should be, at least. To answer your question, CESA is still mainly involved in the interview process, and I think even in the review.
Yeah. So if
You're just shaking your head, so I think what I told you is my.
if I may add.
Your pay grade went up.
Well, I'm talking about assessors and reviews. So yeah, pretty much what Matthew says is we, as ECSA, we are a professional body and we run the admin function for it. In terms of registering engineers, we get that it's a peer review process as stipulated by the International Engineering Alliance. Only an engineer would be able to say, look, you are ready to be an engineer. And what then happens is that we don't recruit based on voluntary associations. We say, hey, we want civil engineers, we want electrical engineers who have registered, and who have X amount of working experience to come sit in our panels, to either be an assessor to look at the application, or to be a reviewer to kind of ask the question, or to be a moderator. So it's a peer review process, and it's not really confined to voluntary associations. It's individual. So if any one of you is registered and you have 5 years working experience and you registered as a professional admin and you want to be an assessor or a reviewer, you can hit me up with an email. We can arrange training, and then we can start introducing you to the process gradually. Sorry.
I think that's okay. But yeah, CESA used to be directly involved, and then the court case is still going on, so that's a whole other kettle of fish. So now it is on a more individual basis, and I know Zedron has been running a couple of training sessions recently, and they have approached the old reviewers as well, but the old reviewers were very old, so change is more difficult. And so I know with Zebulon, who's working a lot on relationships with CESA and other professional organizations, so he's working very hard on building those relationships to try and get a more diverse panel of reviewers, as well as, which I think is going to also add a lot to the registration process. But that's what's happening.
So you're talking about in your project experience report how you can do it as the timeline, and then have the column on the right where you go through all the different experiences, training goals. If you redid it as if via the heading was the training experience, would you then still use the right-hand column to refer back to it, or if it's all under the one experience, then would it not? Would you still need that column?
So in the training reports.
Yes. Not the training report.
In the final report.
Your final the big project report.
Okay, so you're saying there's various terminology, like notations, that you have to put on the right-hand column.
Yeah.
So do you still have to have that right-hand column?
If you've done your headings.
As in per outcome. Yes, you do. You do, because you find that there's those outcomes 9 and 10, which are about making decisions, and those kind of decision making, taking responsibility for your decisions. So often those will come into other outcomes as well. So you'll be writing about outcome 5, but you might have a decision that you've made, so you'll have comma 9 and 10, or there might be an environmental aspect in one of the other ones, or something ethical maybe might come in, even though you're talking about the environmental outcome. So so still keep those. Then the other thing is refer to the specific training reports where more information is in there. So you're usually writing about projects in your last training report, or your last 2 at least, so it's not. But sometimes if there was a specific event you wanted to talk about ethically or contractually that was of use, then definitely just add that in the column as well.
There's another question from Bob.
Yes, question over here.
I think one of the biggest hurdles is to define that periods or phases that you go through. And what I picked up was that was a great sort of thing that you have with your projects, and in chronological order you just sort of indicate these are what I went through and the stages. Brilliant. But what I would ask is, if you had a consistent period phase, say it was a year, would that seem abnormal to the assessor, or is that something that I would accept? Because you would then, in essence, be perhaps identifying the best projects you worked on, as opposed to, would that be an approach that they would accept? Or
Definitely.
so every year you just basically summarize it up, or every 6 months you say, look, this is what I worked on, and they would be happy if they saw those consistent timelines.
Yeah, as long as you show that you have your level of responsibility has increased and you're now on the set level that you need to be.
You know,
You'll probably find that you can definitely start like that, but you will find that there will be some. It won't be as rigid as 6 months, 1 year, but period of 1 year is definitely doable. Definitely, or you might be on site full time for 4.5 months. So you might have only a 4.5 month one, and then you might have 1.5 years, or really it depends on how it works for you. But also, like I said, be flexible with the project. So if from January to June you worked on this, but then you started, just pretend it ended earlier, or shift those deadlines to fit with your major, the major kind of core of that training report. So don't worry too much about adding in tidbits here and there, and chuck out projects that aren't. I mean, like there's some projects that you'd start working on that you think, okay, this is going to be great, but then you actually, something happens, you get shipped off to site and you only did 2 months on that and it actually wasn't worth including, so you just leave it. That kind of thing.
just add to that. That list you saw had about 30 or 40 projects in 5 years. I only used 10 in my TERs. And like my first TER covered 2 years because I just grouped my masters in that one.
Yeah.
In the period B, responsibility level B and responsibility level C, I'm talking about that because I split them up into different responsibility levels. B and C were about 1 year each, but that's because I started writing when I thought I had reached the C. And so that's why it kind of, my first 3 are very kind of evenly spaced. And then it comes to 4 where I speak for 6 months and I'm in the office, and then for a year that I'm on site permanently. Only because in those 6 months that I was in the office, I actually started working on compiling project specs and working through compiling BOQs and doing all of that myself, as opposed to kind of reviewing what other people had done or just feeding information to other people. And compiling tender documents or helping being on the team that did that. And in retrospect, what I should have done is just grouped that into my third and just spoken about site as a new period. But I mean, you know, I think it also has a lot to do with when you start actually writing. And so that's why I say, if you can try and at least have a date in mind where you start, you want to start writing, you feel like you have enough information to start on. When you look back, it'll be easier to group things.
And you can combine later.
Yeah, and you can definitely combine later. I didn't because I decided at each period that I'm going to write about, I'm going to get it signed off so I don't have to worry about it. In retrospect, I should have actually written everything and then kind of tweaked it here and there and then sent it off to write. But the problem was, you hear about people that leave the country and they're not available to sign your stuff anymore, or people just kind of, you know, you can't get hold of them anymore. And so I kind of just decided to be a little bit more prepared in that sense.
Just to add to that, if you say you do two experience reports at the beginning and you can't get them signed off, you can get an affidavit that says that I tried to contact the person who signed them off and they can no longer sign it off. So these two, if you join it into one and then you just attach the 2 that were signed off or whatever back in the day as one.
Yeah.
I think there's a scale here. I'm starting with one in the time. Does it do that right into a report and it's signed off before I read?
Yeah.
Say for 7 months.
Depends on the relationship with the current employer. But I've seen a lot of guys that they leave the company and then they return just to come get their stuff signed. You can write your report and let them sign it off now if it's going to be more convenient. But there's no issue in coming back to the guys and just saying, hey, I've got these reports and I need you guys to sign off for my registration. And most of the guys understand that you need to do this. So yeah, I don't think it'll be a massive issue if you keep it like that.
My question is kind of directed to Mateo. So I just want to find out how did your masters benefit you or disadvantage you? I imagine it makes you more focused in one discipline. So did it make you advantage or was in terms of site experience, what is enough or adequate site experience? And does it have to be aligned with the field that you're applying in, or it can be site experience?
Very good questions. The first one is very personal because I think it definitely brought an advantage. I think the further you educate yourself, the more advantages it brings, more than disadvantages. But in my case, after my 4 years of BSc, I wasn't really ready to go work because I didn't know what discipline I wanted to work in. So I said to myself, I think I could study further, and an opportunity presented itself and I took it. And it was in a field that interested me among others, but it was one of my top interests. So I did that. I think masters benefits you because, or benefited me personally because it teaches you how to project manage in a sense. Because I did a research master's, so it was mostly dissertation. So you don't have to go to lectures as much. You don't have many assignments. You do have course component, but your research component is much bigger, and that's all on you. And that's exactly kind of how it happens here in the workplace. I mean, I'm sure you know, like, it is all on you. Yes, if deadlines are not met, then, you know, it hits the fan. But they did teach me a lot on time management, project management, and just meeting deadlines and analyzing a problem, developing a solution. These are all part of the outcomes. I mean, they're all there set out. I just didn't know it at the time. As soon as I started writing out my TER, I realized, oh, okay, this is what I did this for. So it definitely brought an advantage, but I don't think it puts you in any disadvantage if you don't do a master's and apply for registration. Not at all. That's the first question. I hope I answered it as much as as you wanted me to. The second one, site experience, how much is enough? It really depends. I know a lot of structural engineers, for example, I'm speaking like that because I am a structural engineer, but a lot of structural engineers working on commercial projects, for example, that do not have permanent site experience. They don't, because clients don't want to pay for a permanent structural engineer on site because they're too expensive. But they do go to site inspections and they do go to meetings and they do interact with other stakeholders. So that, I mean, if you look at all the headings on your TERs, pretty much all of those headings you can group into some kind of site problem that you encountered. For me, it was a year. I mean, I think I could have done it in 3 months, 6 months. It really depends on how much exposure you get. And the more exposure you allow yourself to receive in any other field. Like when I was on site, I wasn't only doing structural inspections, rebar inspections and that. I mean, I started managing teams on site and I started attending technical coordination meetings and I started looking into the civil stuff as well. So I think the more you get involved, the more drive you show, the more you learn on site and then the more you will have. For me, the year on site was purely dictated because they said, fine, the client will pay for you to be on site for a year. So what you do with that year is up to you. But I think if you do have a good grip on the outcomes and the responsibility levels, no matter what activity you do, you can always kind of see, okay, this is what I need to be getting out of this. And if you don't, I mean, I learned so much from the RE on site, from the resident engineer on site, because he was a registered engineer. And you know, like so many things that we do on site are actually just kind of on a daily basis that happen in that moment. It's like, can we do this like this? Do we need to go back to the design office? Do we need to get someone, like a geotechnical engineer, to come and look at these excavations because they look deep, they look unstable? Do we tell the contractor to stop? What are the contractual implications of telling the contractor, hey, you stop there? Because if you say to him, stop there, it's a critical part, an item on the critical part, does he have grounds to claim? Like all of that stuff. Like when I first got on site, I was like, I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to speak to anyone. I'm just going to walk around like nothing's happening. And you can't do that. So, and I believe that for that reason, permanent time on site is actually very beneficial. Thank you. Sorry.
Sorry, I just want to add because I know a lot of us aren't lucky enough to have full-time permanent, and I agree with Matteo, I think permanent time on site is really valuable, but I haven't been, like a lot of us just don't have the opportunity. So a lot of us will be doing part-time, attending meetings, site visits, site inspections, and the ECSA requirement for site experience is more related to site-related activities. So if you see it in that sense, and your involvement in document control, your understanding of health and safety, but yeah, not necessarily your role to support the health and safety officers or various things like that, but within a context of your role, attending all the site meetings, checking specs, payment certificates, those kind of things. So it's site-related activities, contract document. I know a big part of that, it's not technically site work, but contract documents, compiling contract documents and stuff goes a long way. Specs, bill of quantities, measuring, remeasuring, and to show that because you won't be operating at a high level of responsibility necessarily, that you are aware of what goes on contractually above you and claims and things like that, but you might not be in a position where you're dealing with them directly, responding directly, those kind of things, which is fine as well. That's you're still going to grow into it. Your role, from what because I'm going through this whole thing, terrifying transition to now all of a sudden, if I'm a PRN now, I have to sign everything off and everything's going to change. But from what I've seen in the office, nothing really changes. You carry on with your work. There are still people who support you and take responsibility and all of that stuff. You basically grow into the role, I think.
A question, I have a comment based on change something, okay, when you stop the contract, they go to the top part. So now you can't change them, it's going to take time to move it. It's off the side. You have counters, that experience, so you're required to register.
If I understand correctly, it's sort of things that the things that change on site and there's redesign to be done. Is that the question you're asking? Definitely counts as design. It's design work. It's as a result of activities changing on site, but it counts as design work.
But you must note that it's reviewed and checked by a professional engineer, so you must show that awareness that you're not just doing a design and it's on the goes.
Yes.
You understand your limits, and definitely the design helps, but you need to show that it's reviewed and checked and signed off.
Things happen quickly on site, so you might want to do the design, and there you go, carry on. Like you have to be able to show that it was checked, it was reviewed by a competent
and highlight
person.
that, because that's important.
Yeah. Answer, did you want to add to that?
It's more or less the same. Just want to say that there are guys that's mainly only on site, and their design experience might only be to site-related queries, seal designs or mixed designs and stuff like that, which also cancels some of the stuff. And you also handle engineering activities or solve engineering problems when you're only on site, so it doesn't limit you if you're in that area.
To my understanding, there are two ways to register. Okay, one is based on your paperwork, your education and that, and the other one is based on your experience. Okay, is there a difference for the application or the website?
Yeah. The route, if you go based on your experience, you still submit. So that means, so there are two aspects to that. The one might mean that you don't necessarily have, for example, a BTEC. You might not have a BTEC, but you can apply for a technologist. But if you have more than 10 years experience, or is it's got to be more than that? To apply for a technologist. Because I know if you have a BTEC and I'll double check, but so the one is the education part of it. The other one is you have the education part of it, you've just actually got way more experience. Then you use the training the TEO, training experience outline, which allows you to, so if you have any more than 10 years experience, then you can compact your project experience into bullet points. And then it's only the last 3, you only have to write 3 training reports basically, and a main report. So you still have to do paperwork, but you can condense first. I mean, those projects don't even count anymore because you're working at such a high level now, you know. So it's like just showing that you've been in the industry for ages. And
The question over there.
My question is based on the referees. I know you mentioned that at least one of your referees needs to be registered. In my case, I had a transition from contracted to consultant, and my contracts managers weren't registered. So how do I approach it while writing about my experience?
so your referee is different to the person, the supervisor that signs off your reports. So the person who signs off that training report is your supervisor, and that's fine. They don't have to be registered. I know when it gets to the end of your responsibility, it's a little flag to the review assessors whether you're working under, you're applying for a PRNG, but you're not working under a PRNG. That can cause a problem, so think about that. But definitely, they can definitely sign off your reports, because in contracting, a lot of them don't have registration, so that's fine.
Sorry, for the mechanical engineers, I've been told that you would have to add an additional calculation-based report. Is that still the case? It's just no one's mentioned it, so...
So, in addition to the engineering report, I'm not sure, because I was only aware of the fact that civils used to have to write an essay. Yeah, but Zebulon he'll find that out, because that's quite important.
Because my understanding is that the previous way of doing it, it was part of the engineering report, and then when they took it out, every single mechanical since then has not gotten their PRH because they didn't write this calculation report, which is then added afterwards and just prolongs the experience.
Oh, that's great. Okay, we'll definitely find that out.
Sorry, I just want to answer. One of my colleagues that visited actually told us part of the appraisal, not the professional review, the one just before that they don't think you're quite there, maybe they ask for one of your calculation reports. So there was a thing on the in-between that got asked for the calculation, but you got asked for it to submit it to them.
Yeah, it's supplementary information. Yeah,
Yeah,
sometimes they do that.
I think if we could just get clarification.
I completely agree.
Because
Yeah.
I know 2 of my colleagues applied more than a year and a half ago, and then had to do this and then add that, and it's still not registered. I mean, that's an enormously long time to wait.
Yeah. Yeah. Do we have your email? Can we get your email address? Anyone else? More snacks and drinks?
Any more questions?
I have a question. Who's supporting England? I feel sorry for you guys.
It's coming out. Sorry guys, just before you go, just the guest speakers today gave their time up and we really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for your amazing input and it was very insightful. The recordings will be recorded and I'm sure they'll be available to answer any questions. So thank you so much for your time guys. Thank you.